storytellers that imagine norms and create realities through their written, spoken, and visual works, through their imaginations. Storytelling, be it through words, written or spoken, or images, still or moving, is backdrop against a physical context. These contexts attempt to create a place where events can occur, which transforms into a space that people and objects can belong to. The context itself becomes a character in the narrative, evoking feelings of nostalgia, joy, fear, or even sanctity, to name just a few, of course. The context becomes the canvas on which the story is painted, the stage on which it is performed, and a representation of the ideas that it carries. This context is a product of the storyteller's imagination, an imagination that stems from experiences, memory, or an interpretation of said experiences or memories. How far from reality do you think imagination can be? Or how real can a story become? How authentic is fiction, really? What are the creative possibilities of lived and imagined environments? Where do these stem from? And what is the potential of exploring or projecting reality and imaginaries to storytelling? We have a very exciting panel with us today. Could I please invite on stage Paromita Vohra? Thank you so much for being here, Paromita. Paromita is India's most beloved feminist thinker and pleasure activist. Her extraordinary body of truth-telling, kinetic, and intensely sensual films, online videos, art installations, television programming, and writing have made sense of feminism, love, sexuality, urban life, and popular culture for a diverse and loving audience for over 25 years. She has directed the documentaries Unlimited Girls, Q2P, Morality TV, and Loving Jihad, and Where's Sandra, amongst others, as well as the cutting-edge primetime TV series Connected Hum Tum, and several short film musicals. She is the writer of the film Khamosh Pani, or Silent Waters, the comic Priya's Mirror, the play Ishqiya Dharavi Ishtail, and several documentaries. Her fiction and nonfiction have been widely published, and she writes a weekly newspaper column, Paranormal Activity. In 2015, she founded Agents of Ishq, a pioneering digital platform which transformed conversations on sex, love, and desire for young Indians. She is currently its creative director. Thank you, Paromita, for being here. We also have with us Aradhana Seth. Please welcome her on stage. She is a noted filmmaker, producer, visual artist, and photographer. She has worked as a production designer for over 15 feature films and art directed The Darjeeling Limited, London Has Fallen, and The Born Supremacy. She also produced A Suitable Boy, a television series for BBC airing on Netflix, and has directed 20 documentary films. As an artist and photographer, she has had solo shows at Kmart Prescott Road, Mumbai, and Sunaparata in Goa. Thank you for being here, Aradhana. We are also joined by Sooni Taraporevala. If we could have you on stage, please. Sooni is a Padma Shri awarded. She has been Padma Shri awarded. Her first screenplay began her long creative association with Meera Nair, her friend and classmate from Harvard. Salam Bombay was nominated for an Academy Award, won more than 25 awards worldwide, earning her the Lillian Gish Award for Excellence in Film from Women in Films, Los Angeles. Her other produced screenplay include Mississippi Masala, also for Meera Nair, The Namesake, based on the book by Jhumpa Lahiri, Such a Long Journey, based on the book by Rohinton Mistry, for which she received a Genie nomination for Best Screenplay from the Academy of Canadian Cinema and Television. My Own Country, based on the book by Dr. Abraham Verghese, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, based on his historical research. Her photographs have been part of photography exhibitions around the world. We are very happy to have you here, Sooni. Thank you. And last but not the least, very important person for our panel today is Hrishikesh Kannan. Lovely to have you here, Rishi. Thank you. Popularly known as Rishi K, he is a producer and presenter on the nation's biggest breakfast radio show on 94.3 Radio 1. He is also the national brand head for the Radio 1 network, a multiple RAPA and Promax award-winning radio host, voice artist, and MC. Hrishikesh has won the War of the RJs, a nationwide poll in which radio listeners voted him on top of the heap as the #1 radio presenter in India in 2016. His podcast, The Hrishikesh Sessions, is one of the most heard podcasts on Spotify, Amazon Prime Music, Ghana, Apple Podcasts, and JioSaavn. And he has also, I'm sure, given all of us a lot of company on many rides to work and back. So thank you for being here and taking charge of this panel. A very warm welcome to all of you.
Thank you very much. I think I echo the thoughts of everybody on this panel that this is such a wonderful atmosphere. Big ups to Nairika and the entire team at Godrej and Boyce and the Godrej Design Lab to take this 70-year-old factory and do what they've done for Conscious Collective. It's so pristine, it's beautiful, and thank you all of you for joining us for this particular discussion. You know, Paromita, I want to start with you and by a very vibrant compliment with one. I used to read the great Busy Bee by Ram Contractor, and I was like, my God, can anybody represent the city like Busy Bee would? And there are days when I read Paro Normal Activity, and I feel the same way.
Because that's a huge compliment.
Yeah, you know, the way the city comes across in your column is wonderful. It really is a character, isn't it? Talk about that.
I mean, I think, all of us have a different map of the city. The city is not a singular map, but it kind of comes alive in our minds depending on the experiences we have in it. And my grandmother lived in Bombay. She used to be in the movies. So I think when I was a kid and I came to Bombay, so much of that life determined how I saw the city. I saw it as a space where people were very bohemian and people would stay up all night singing songs and going to the beach and hanging out. Then I came as an adult to study and I saw a completely different aspect of the city. I would go to college in Pedder Road and the bus was hard and the train was hard. And then I lived in a tenement housing colony where my neighbors were bar dancers and auto rickshaw drivers. And now I live in a middle class flat where my neighbors are respectable middle class people, whatever that means, right? So I think Bombay especially affords you the chance to experience numerous cities at the same time, numerous lives. And I think what you come to know is that the city is also made up of multiple desires. Everybody comes here with a fantasy of what their life is going to be like in the city. That is what makes the city beautiful despite its difficulties, its extreme inequalities, and its hardships and violence even. So I think for me it's a romantic experience to live in the city. For me the thought that I'll turn a corner and something unexpected will happen always animates the way I relate to the city. And that's really the kind of character it then becomes in my writing or even in my films. Yeah.
Well done. Aradhana, you on the other hand have to create cities and colonies. Often those that don't exist in real life or variations of what exists in real life. I remember the opening sequence of the Born film, which is supposed to be Goa, but where would you get to film with a Hollywood cast in the middle of Goa in a crowded afternoon? So you obviously had to recreate that. And when you recreate that, how much of it is exactly the way it is? How much scope do you leave for a little bit of drama, for the visual narrative? Talk to us about that, please.
I always start with the script, really. And once you read the script, you think of what you will take, which is real, what you'll create on a sound stage, and what you will create within a given space. So you kind of read the script and you think about which bits you want to do where. And you talk to the director about it, you think about it yourself, and then you go on location recce's, endless location recce's, which really, across the city, you do location briefs and then you go across looking for a location to fit the bill that is in the script. And I think that along the way you take a decision of whether you want to build it, whether you have the budget to build it, whether you have the time to build it, and how you want to create it. And all the traveling and seeing then gets put into your script, in a sense. So basically, you start off with an idea, from the script, and I think all of it is from your lived experiences of other places you've seen, spaces that you want to recreate or create. So either you go on to a soundstage, you build a whole set, or you go into a space and morph it into what you want to say. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. Sooni, I marvel at the sheer range of the kind of screenplays that you've worked at. I mean, one knows that you understand the Bombay milieu, the Mumbai milieu, but you've been called upon to write scripts on the Mississippi Delta or New York City. How do you deal with that then, when the narrative plays out in a city that you perhaps don't know as well? Is it conversations with the director, the story writer, and you? Is it research? Talk about that.
It's all research, even scripts. And besides scripts, I'm also a photographer and I'm also a director now. So everything is based on research. So we actually went to Mississippi, we went to Uganda, and I love research. All my creative work is based on reality and trying to be as authentic as possible to that space. And so I've never, as a director, shot anything on a soundstage. It's always locations, and as Aradhana said, endless recce's, which I love because I take a lot of photographs when I'm recceing, and I see parts of the city that I would not have ordinarily. So for me, it's very much a documentarian approach rather than inventing.
We spoke of your writing, Paromita, but I want to speak about documentary filmmaking, which is such an essential part of what you are. Now, what is the approach as far as that is concerned when you're obviously making a documentary, let's say, in Mumbai city? Is it to be as authentic and real as possible? Or do you give in to people who say there should be that little element of drama, even in a documentary?
Well, I think, reality is itself born from fantasy, right? The city is always being sold to us as a fantasy. Like, every government will say, I'm going to make Bombay into Singapore, Hong Kong, Shanghai. Like, Bombay has been supposed to become many other cities. So there's always a kind of idea of the future that the city holds. So actually, everything, like, I feel like in reality, for instance, you'll see a shop. I'll tell you a little story. There's a man on my street called Haider Bhai, who used to own a TV and VCR rental shop when I first moved to my neighborhood in '92. After some time, he opened a VCD store, which became a DVD store. And now he owns, those feng shui ornaments? He sells those. And one day, when I started going past Haider Bhai's shop, I would see a goat tied up outside and eating leaves, and Haider Bhai sitting on a chair. The stoop is not more than like this big, right? And Haider Bhai has put his folding chair there and he's feeding the goat. So it's a stereotype. I thought Bakri is coming and Haider Bhai is fattening this goat up. Then Bakri passed by and the goat was still there. So I went and I asked Haider Bhai, why do you have this goat? He said, oh, come on, madam, I've had her for so long. She fell off a truck and I nursed her. And usne kitne logon ka jaan bachaya dengue ke time and all that. And then I asked him, what is the name of the goat? And he said, it's Basanti, like Heba Malini in Sholay. And she has now had 2 children, and they are called Karan and Arjun. Okay? And all these goats and their kids are living in Haider Bhai's flat in Andheri East. So now, there is tremendous drama in the reality of the city. And I think I love that part of the city. In my documentaries, I think I've tried very hard to evoke some of those qualities of the types of people who live in the city and make the city. So I think we're always being told the city is made by architects and planners, which buildings are, and cities are also imagined by these people. But I mean, I've made a film about Catholic girls called Where's Sandra, right? And the idea of a Sandra from Bandra also makes the city. The idea of a woman who likes to have a good time, wear a dress, who's there at the backup dancer in Hindi movie songs is also the city actually. So I think the approach I take in my films is to really tell stories of the city which are not frequently told, but which have had a fundamental role in shaping the city that we inhabit. It's because city is not only made up, like you hear that Bombay is a very safe city for women, for example. How did it become that way? It is because there is a history of women at work, which started with the Catholic women who went into offices and worked there, right? So I think that's really how I look for it. But also, I made a film called Q2P, which is about toilets, which also thinks about who is the city for. Like when you imagine a city of the future, how will you know who the city is being made for? Is it really for everybody? So for me, it was like if you look at who has to queue to pee, who has to stand in a line to pee, you get an idea of who the city is being made for. It's normally rich men, right? Like everything else in the world. So, I mean, yeah, I suppose that's how it is. And then when you have to render the city in your films, you actually look for those images, that kind of crazy writing. You look for people who speak in that with typical Bombaya swag, because that's the way you're trying to evoke the city. Yeah.
One of the things I find very fascinating about art design, production design, is having to recreate one city in another city. We were just talking about this outside Aradhana, talking about how to recreate a portion of Mumbai filming in Shimla, a portion of Prague filming in Kunur perhaps. And obviously you've got to take elements from the mother city, the city that you have to represent in the current city, in the city where you are. So I'd like you to give us an insight into that.
So you start obviously looking for a location where the windows, the architecture, there's a match somehow. So recently we did Calcutta in Lucknow, but we looked for a deco house of that period that would work itself into the storyline. Or when there isn't that much of a budget, you can't go to London, so you do the exteriors in London and the interiors in Bombay. And you take a house in Chembur, an apartment building that overlooks a green meadow or a golf course actually, and completely construct within the house. Sort of you close up, in fact, most of the windows. You replace the windows to look like London push-up windows. You board up the whole house, put wallpaper that would be resonant of that time in the period in London. And you work through the fireplaces, the small details that you imagine and that you've researched and then looked at for the period that the film is set in. And I always find it's often easier to go back into, say, partition or Pakistan at that time rather than 20 years ago, because then you have to really research what existed, what was the food on the shelves, what was the food in the kitchen. So the one where we did London in Bombay, I kind of researched all the bottles, all the things that existed like Marmite or Oxo. What would somebody eat? What could we still buy that existed there? How is milk, those white milk things with little red caps. So you're constantly looking for the details that leads your eye to think that you are in London.
Wonderful. Sooni, let's come to the photography now. Telling stories through just photographs. I mean, I know that a lot of photographers just walk around the city, whichever city they're in, camera in hand, not knowing what's going to come out, as opposed to some who are already commissioned. And they allow their camera then to tell stories. As a photographer, when you're in a city, whether it's your own, which is Mumbai, or another city, what is your attempt? Do you, when you start the day, say, I'm going to start shooting thus, or do you let instinct or the spaces themselves speak to you when you're there?
It depends on which period of my life I was doing photography. In the early days, I used to carry my camera around and never specifically go to a place to take a photograph, but I have a photograph of two kids riding a camel at Marine Drive. And I was lucky enough to have my camera with me. So it's not like I went there to take photographs, it just happened to be there. With regards to my Parsi's work, I started out taking pictures of my family and my immediate neighborhood. And then when I was working towards a book, I specifically went to places to take pictures. Like Princess Street is disproportionately represented in my book because there are lots of Parsis and they're on the street over there. So yeah, but I never managed to do what I should have done, which is have a camera with me all the time, because in the old days SLRs were not very light, but now with my phone, I have a camera with me all the time, and so I'm constantly taking pictures now. Wherever I am, it's like a visual diary for me now.
Paromita, who is somebody you would say, a filmmaker or a writer, who's really used the city as a wonderful tool to take their narrative forward? And what is it about their work that you find absolutely fascinating?
Any city? You mean any city at all?
Any city at all?
So, I mean, I think there are so many. It's hard. I think a film that I love is an old film by Jean Rouch called Chronicle of a Summer. It is set in Paris in the year 1960. And if I ever had to say I was influenced by something, I would say I was influenced by that film because it follows 8 people who just happen to be living in Paris in that summer, through the summer. And the city actually is it's a portrait of the city through the portraits of these people. So I think that's definitely a film and a filmmaker who used the city as a character in a very deep and unexpected way. Because, very often cities are, Guru Dutt has used Bombay, I think, in ways that still fuel our imagination, like that kind of noir romanticness of downtown Bombay. And I think Ram Gopal Verma, in some of his films, evoked central Bombay, an area I spent a lot of time in, around the textile mills, in Nagpara, and all of those parts, which I think not too many films have rendered. So has Saeed Mirza, I think, depicted the city in interesting ways. Yeah. And in terms of writers, I think Altaf Tyrewala's book is wonderful about Baikala. Kiran Nagarkar's Ravan and Eddie is a great Bombay book for sure. Jerry Pinto has used the city also in beautiful ways. So actually there's no dearth of examples. And actually I want to suggest there is a fantastic resource of books about the city, about cities, that has been created by a place called the Indian Institute of Housing Settlements, which I would suggest people can have a look at to find more writers if they want. Yeah.
Aradhana, same question to you from a design perspective. In cinema or series, if you've seen makers really use cities beautifully to take forward the narrative.
I think there are many, in a way, for me. There's Aparna Sen, who I think did 36 Chaurangi in a way where she used a part of Calcutta that I grew up in and used it beautifully to represent that one small life there, but also brought in texture from the city. Then I feel like Wes Anderson hasn't used the city as much as he's used spaces and places in a fantastical way. So in the fantasy of how you imagine things, he has used, in say a space like in Grand Budapest, he's used he's morphed everything. So it's not the absolute use of the city, but it's a use of the altered use of the city, which I think is very interesting, or as a kind of backdrop, but morphed it into his imagination. So I feel that that's also been very interesting for me to watch his work.
Sooni, same question to you. People whose work you've seen and gone, wow, I feel they've used the city wonderfully well.
I was going to ask you to ask me another question because I can never think
can never,
about names. Well, one comes to mind, which is a movie called Hiroshima Mon Amour that is by a filmmaker called Alan Rene, which is about Hiroshima after, during, it goes into flashbacks about Hiroshima after the horrific nuclear. So many, Managar by Satyajit Ray. I think Salam Bombay was very good.
Very, very good. You're
Yeah.
right. Great. Yeah, please.
Actually, I was just thinking also that R.K. Narayan wrote Malgudi Days. It's completely imaginary
yeah.
place. It's not a real
Actually, you've
place.
segued into my next question. But
And
yeah.
I also wanted to say, also out of syllabus answer, that I think that some painters like Sudhir Patwardhan painting the city, I think there's nothing like it about Bombay. It's so tender, it's so beautiful, it's so rich, it's so layered. And similarly, a great painter, Bhupen Khakkar, I recently read his short stories. And I couldn't believe, I was so animated and excited while reading the stories because I felt it was so identifiable, like little things we've seen, especially in a Bombay of just 25 years ago, not that older Bombay. That's really rendered in great detail even in his short stories. So yeah.
Yeah, like I said, it segues beautifully into my next bit, which is actually imagined cities and imagined spaces in writing as well as cinema. We were outside talking about Riverdale, which Paromita didn't think very highly of, or we will read tomorrow in Paranormal Activity. Since the Archies is so prevalent, you can't go by 100 meters without seeing some advertising of the upcoming film. But Malgudi Days, fabulous example. I mean, it didn't exist except in R.K. Narayan's collective consciousness, to use this particular beautiful festival here. So, to use one's imagination to create a city or a space based on which a narrative can be taken forward. I'd like you to comment on that. Aradhana, would you like to take that? Microphone, please. Yeah.
So I think I'll go back. I think I already sort of semi-deviated from the earlier question you asked and sort of answered the imagined question, because I think that Wes Anderson is working a lot from imagination when he does, say, Life Aquatic, or the one with the film which is where all the kids are in that camp, Moonrise Kingdom. I think he's a very good master of imagining spaces and creating them from really from his imagination. And it's interesting, the production designer who did 7 Years a Slave also did Grand Budapest Hotel, and you can see the width of the guy's work that he did a film that is so steeped in reality and history, and the other one is so steeped in fantasy. So I think that's him. He's a master of that for me.
Have you been asked to create some imaginary spaces by any of your
No, but
makers?
I've cheated a lot of spaces, like Aradhana said. The most recent series that I've directed and written takes place in Calcutta, but we couldn't afford to shoot everything in Calcutta, so we shot interiors in Bombay, and it's cheated as Calcutta. And the only thing that we really built on my film Ye Ballet was the dance studio that the boys attend, and it was so real that people were actually looking for that dance studio in Bombay, and we actually got ripped off by Levi's for the Deepika Padukone ad, which copied it to the last detail, including the color. And it was incredible because I called my production designer. I said, didn't we get rid of the set after we finished? She said, of course. I said, but it's in these ads. And it was a complete rip-off. And it would never have happened abroad. And sadly, it happened here. So that's my story about sets.
Paromita, there are times when there are books, there are columns, there are movies, where they don't speak much about the city. And they say, no, we will just concentrate on the relationships. And the city really doesn't matter. But yet, you're left with a lot of intrigue saying, oh my God, character A met character B on this busy, bustling street. Could it be Fort? Could it be Chaurangi? You know, things like that.
I mean, I think that different cities lead to different forms of relationships. Cities also have their own emotional life, right? I mean, because of the way that they are structured. So let's take the example of romance in Bombay. When you think of a film like, I'm forgetting the name of the film, but Na Bole Tum Na Maine Kuch Kaha, you know, it has that song.
Choti si baat hai?
No, it's Amol Palekar and
Baaton
Tina
baaton
Muni.
mein. I don't know.
Bato Bato Mein.
Yeah.
So they meet on the train, right? They fall in love on the local train. Or there are many songs that happen in BEST buses and otherwise. Or if you look at Manto's writings about Bombay, in which he doesn't talk about the city that much, he does a little bit, but there are a lot of different types of relationships. And relationships, say, between a writer and a sex worker, which is neither romantic nor friendly, nor only transactional, but somewhere in between all of those things. So, or if I think about my relationship with my neighbors when I lived in PMGP Colony, the tenement housing block, and how different they were from me, how little we knew about how little they knew about my private life, how I knew everything about theirs. Now these are kinds of relationships that come into being because of the nature of the city, right? So even if you never mentioned the name of a road, you know that some things are so Bombay, or some things are so Delhi, or these things happen in Calcutta. So I think even people who say that they are not writing about a place are always evoking that place.
Well said. You know, you worked on a movie, a motion picture called The Darjeeling Limited. And a lot of the action took place on the Darjeeling Limited, which is a train. So now I'm going to come into even more confined spaces. Not just large cities or smaller cities, but let's say if a story were largely to play out in a train. Everybody has memories of train journeys, whether it's Indian Railways or, you know, European Rail or whatever it is. Talk to me about that. Talk to me about working on the Darjeeling Limited from a production design, art perspective, what kind of train, the dynamics of using that train for various scenes to play out to take the story forward.
So I'm going to start by saying that I worked on multiple trains, and also it depends very often on the period that the film is set. So from a 1920, from a steam train to a more, to a train that was built later, but all those films have been steeped in reality. Whereas the Darjeeling Limited was like a mix of two things. There was this real train, 4 bogies from Northern Railways, 4 from Northwestern. We got 4 derelict carriages because they were ready to give them to us for a very long period. We needed the train for about 8 weeks. We got the train, came to Jodhpur, where we had a whole train yard to our disposal. It was called Bhagat Ki Koti. It was a derelict train yard, a train yard that was not in use. We used all the places of the train station as our film set, storage, set dressing, offices. And every single day we painted the exterior of the train. We had time to paint all of it. And we built the entire interior. Also because each bogie is only about 70 feet long and 10 feet wide. So for a camera to shoot and for lights to go into it, you have to actually mount everything. So the camera got mounted on the ceiling very often. The lights got built into the set. And we used a sound stage next to where we were building the, sort of reconstructing the train as a small set from the main bedroom where the boys are, peeling apart in the rehearsals each bit that they wanted to shoot. So let's say there are 3 bunks and we want to shoot only in one bunk. We need space for the camera to go into the other bunk. So we started peeling apart bits of train compartment areas and created a design which was aluminium strips as a joinery to be able to dismantle and mantle very fast while we are shooting on the train. so that you can pull out a bunk, you can put your camera where the bunk is, you can move a wall and it doesn't look like fresh paint, like it doesn't look like that. Like it doesn't look like two things have been joined, but there were strips. So the design was also constructed to be able to take apart the train. And all the cables went into the wall of the train. It needed to be soundproof. Wes wanted to shoot out of a moving train. And he wanted to shoot every day, every morning to night on the moving train. So we mirrored the main compartment, which is 4041, to identically on the opposite side so that we could shoot on our way and we could shoot on our way back. Because we couldn't waste the time on our way back. And if you shoot on the way back, your 180 degrees is incorrect. So you have to actually, we made a mirror compartment. So we basically flipped it, and so we shot on our way out and we shot on our way in. But you have to decide that in advance, all of that.
Paromita, let's talk about desire in the city. Desire in the city. And really, there are so many, a myriad of ways that desire plays out in the city that you might be in. I mean, a lot of people would argue saying that Paris is overhyped as the most romantic city in the world. And you look at couples on Juhu Beach or on Hanging Garden, and desire is playing out there as beautifully. So, because, a lot of your work talks about desire and, linking it to the city. Talk to me about that.
So I have a friend who said to me once that, the best awards are the ones that you get. And I think the most romantic cities are the ones where you fall in love, right? So it's not really about the city, but it's sometimes your experience of the city. But of course, yes, when we are told that a place is romantic, we like to make that place the backdrop for our romantic planning. I think Bombay, though, is a unique city in terms of how much desire it makes possible, right? A few years ago, at Agents of Ishq, we created something called a queer map of Bombay. And we made that by talking to different kinds of queer people about what are important places in the city for them. And it's remarkable, right? Like there have been so many cruising spots. There are spaces, of course, where the first HIV clinic opened, and then Parmesh fought with me and said, why isn't the Godrej Culture Lab in that map? Because it's also a space of queerness. So on the one hand, I think all these desires which are disallowed in many places become possible in a city. I think that cities do create a kind of passion because they allow individuals to become themselves. We experience our own selves very romantically. So we become quite avid and interested in romance in a city, I think, compared to other places. But I shouldn't generalize because I think even in small towns, I shot a film in Meerut called Morality TV or Loving Jihad. And I think it was a film about moral policing, but the number of different kinds of young people I saw holding hands in the street. And I think you can go into any city, a small city, a big city, and go into the park and see how many names are scribbled on benches, on trees, in the train compartment. And the city is like totally bubbling with desire all the time, right?
Sooni, please.
The other side of the romance in Bombay is that there's no privacy because space is so tight and expensive. And so you see, couples making out. Of course, everyone's seen them at Marine Drive with their back to the public, There is just no space in the city for romance besides public spaces, which I think is really sad, actually.
It is. Have you been thrown off by an unknown space?
Sorry?
Have you been thrown off by an unknown space? A space that you've suddenly gone in and said, oh, I have to film here. Oh, I have to write something about this. Oh, I have to shoot here. Because all this while we've been talking about familiar spaces, imagined spaces, but an unknown space and its effect that it has on you.
There's a million unknown spaces in Bombay because it's so vast. And, that's why I love it creatively because I could never, in a dozen lifetimes, explore the entire city. So yeah, when I go on location recce's, there are many places that I've never seen and I've lived here born here, grown up here. There are many of those kinds of spaces. It's not that it's sometimes good to just see them and not necessarily have to put them into a story or photograph them, you know. But yeah, this city in particular, is just full of unexpected pockets and unexpected people and unexpected situations, lots of them.
Have you been pushed into a situation like that? Where you've been told, hey Aradhana, this is the space you have. You know, what are you going to make out of it? And then how have you reacted?
You're constantly pushed into
Constantly.
that situation because there's like 4 days to shoot and they're like, we'll let you know about a location, we'll let you know. Or you get a location. I remember working on this film called The Guru. We got this amazing house in Old Delhi. And literally 2 days before that, they were like, we don't have the police permission. We'd been prepping it for a month. And we were like, how can that be? They said, but you have to recreate. You have to do it fast and you have to do it in 2 days. So you're pushed sometimes per somebody else's, I guess we have to say productions, wayward ways to be shoved in. But one thing that I have done very often is when I go to a city for the first time and I'm jet lagged and I just kind of walk around for 2 days. I try to do that before I even get to understand the city. And it's phenomenal. I mean, it's kind of disconcerting, but it's phenomenal because it peels up very, very exciting things that your conscious mind is still in a state of slight sleep deprivation. And so you walk around and you imagine all these things in it, and you also have some sort of information about it because you've looked at maps and you've read books and you've researched it and you've read the history of it. And I did that in Prague, and I thought I saw Prague in a way that I would have never seen it in that jet lag space. And then I went back to see it in a not so jet lag space, and it looked completely different.
Okay, I've just been told that our time on this panel is up, but I think Sneha and Mrinalini are going to come, and they want to involve all of us here in the room with their discussion. So, Sneha, Mrinalini, if you could come and take over, please.
If there are any audience questions, we'd be happy to take a few. Yes, we've got one right here.
If you could just take the name of the person you want to ask and then go ahead.
Good evening. As you can see, I'm the photographer here. I'm with the media team. My name is Ajil. I'm from Kerala actually. My question is, anyone can answer it. I'm an aspiring filmmaker. I want to make it as a filmmaker. I have done short films. I have started. I have been working in many films. I even recently DP'd an advertisement for Godrej as well. So right now, the monstrosity of the film industry, or whenever I think I need to be a filmmaker, whenever I see the industry and it's so big, it's so huge, the films that get out, they are so big, I get anxious about myself. I am afraid if I will be able to make it. So for someone like me, what would be the one piece of advice that you guys could give me, the people who have made it? So yeah, that's my question.
I think our friend has gone completely off topic, but
Yes.
anybody could take that.
But keep working hard. I mean, life's unpredictable, right? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I would say the same as Parv. Just shoot every day. Think, you can even make a story of the person next door. Like when I drove in today from the airport and I noticed that there's a building where all the clothes were hanging outside, like everybody's clothes. You can see, it's almost like you can recreate 20 stories of everybody's home from what's hanging outside. So you can make stories every day and film and photograph.
Yeah, when I walked in, Aradhana was sitting, and I thought she was taking a ridiculously close selfie of herself. Turns out she was fascinated by the roof of the factory, and she was actually shooting that.
I was, because I came to this factory when it was really a factory, or it was like a paint shop. And I realized today, somebody told me that it's the same place. And so I was photographing it to see what has changed and what hasn't changed.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Yeah. I think it's been really interesting. We started the day with talking about impermanence and flux and designing and creating cities, and we had a long discussion about that, and Rahul was very articulate about how, especially the Kumbh, it kind of appears and disappears. And we are closing the day today talking about impermanence in cities and imagining and reimagining spaces, but in a very different way. But I think it's interesting to note that it's all about, at the end of the day, designing, reflecting, looking back at what we've experienced and how we take that forward. I was really taken by what you said, Paromita, about how cities are not just designed by buildings, or they're not constructs of just structures, but it's people. And I think that's a great note to end on today, where all of us, the audience, you, me, everyone over here, we're the ones who are contributing to creating that city. And we've had a great series of conversations today, very inspiring. And we hope that all of you go back tonight with your hearts filled with hope and emboldened and empowered to create and contribute to the city that you all live in and aspire to live in. But a great warm thank you to all of you for being here.